The Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens, two teams who have injuries out the wazoo, are going to face off on Saturday night. What kind of game are we going to get? It's a toss-up, so let's talk some puck. Hey gang, Costa here for PuckTalk Montreal this Friday, November 20th. Thank God it's Friday. The week's over. We can move on to the weekend. As we do, of course, the Montreal Canadiens licking their wounds a little bit as they've had their asses handed to them for the majority of the last 5 games, especially after the drubbing they got just the other night from the Washington Capitals. What's going to change? I don't know if there's very much that's going to change, but as we look ahead, we look at lineups. And when we look at lineups, we look at Instacustoms. Instacustoms.com is Canada's highest rated print shop with over 3,000 Google reviews and a 4.9 star rating. They offer direct-to-garment printing on all your favorite clothing, along with coffee and travel mugs, and they even offer embroidery. Habs won a Stanley Cup? You can win too on Stanley Street at Instacustoms.com. Now, normally, I start off with the lines that are in. But the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs have such huge gaps as far as injuries are concerned, I thought I would start there. And it all begins with the Leafs, where you've got Anthony Stolarz, who carried the load while Joseph Woll was out. He's on the IR, along with Chris Tanev, Brandon Carlo, Austin Matthews, Matthew Nyes, and Nicolas Roy. On the Canadian side of things, we've got Caden Gooley. Ryan Brocker's back. I don't know why they have him out, but he's back and he's in Laval. Patrick Laine, Alex Newhook, Kirby Doc, and Jake Evans, who's day-to-day. Now, who's to say what's going to happen here with the Canadiens and the Leafs, right, as far as their injuries are concerned? What is the prevailing thought? Obviously, the Leafs are missing a lot of firepower, especially given the fact that they're missing Matthews and Nyes. Now, of course, they've still got some good firepower up front from John Tavares, Max Domi, William Nylander. And in goal, Joseph Woll is holding the fort since he was missed for a small period of time to start the season. But what does that mean? How do the Canadiens and the Leafs shape up? Well, let's take a look at how the lineups are going to look, starting again with the Leafs. They've got William Nylander, Tavares, and Calle Jarnkrok on the first line, Bobby McCann, Max Domi, Nick Robertson on the second, Steven Lorentz, Scott Lawton, and Easton Cowan on the third, and Dakota Joshua, Caleb Quinlan, and Matthias Michelli on the fourth line. Now, the fun part is that Michelli can be rather dangerous, especially on the power play. So to dismiss him because he's on the fourth line might be a little bit of a stretch for the Montreal Canadiens. And we know what Scott Lawton did in the preseason. He was injured for a bit coming into the season. Now he's back. We'll see how that works out. For the top 2 lines, I mean, obviously, they're missing the firepower of an Austin Matthews and a Matthew Nyes, but, you know, William Nylander and John Tavares are no slouches, and they can certainly shoulder the load. And Max Domi has been playing some of his most inspiring hockey. Now, granted, the Leafs are 4-4-2 in their last 10, but just this past week, they came away with 2 wins and an overtime loss. So maybe they're starting to turn a little bit of a corner. However, it remains to be seen. Moving on to their defense. On defense, obviously, Morgan Rielly and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Simon Benoit, Jake McCabe, Dakota Mermis, and Troy Stecher. Their top 3D, very good. Their bottom 3D, not so much. But, you know, specific attacks when the Canadiens are on the ice is going to be the focal point here. Obviously, you want to work the top 3D into submission. So you want to get that puck in the zone. You want to cycle it. You want to get physical. But we'll see how that goes. I'll talk about it a little bit later as I come to my 5 keys to victory. Then you look at the goaltenders. And, of course, the goaltenders, whoopsie. Hey, where are you? There you are. Joseph Woll and, of course, Dennis Hildeby is the backup. So, obviously, this being a Saturday night, Woll will be in, and we'll see what happens. For the Montreal Canadiens, a very big part of their game will be whether or not Jake Evans is actually in the lineup. But they have a little bit of a contingency. They called up Florian Xhekaj just in case. How he's going to be implemented is going to be interesting because Xhekaj is a left winger. He's not necessarily a centerman. So how is that going to work out? Daily faceoff really hasn't made the change yet. But when you look at it, you've got Caulfield, Suzuki, and Bolduc, Slavkovsky, Kapanen, and Ivan Demidov. Joshua Roy, Jake Evans is still in there again. He's day-to-day. And Josh Anderson, Jared Davidson, Joe Veleno, and Brendan Gallagher. Now, my interpretation would be this. If the Montreal Canadiens are forced to play with 4 centers and not have Jake Evans in the lineup, obviously, what I think might happen is that Joe Veleno may be pushed up to the 3rd line while somebody like Florian Xhekaj ends up on the 4th. Another thing that I think might happen is that you may very well see all 3 guys from the American Hockey League play together, which wouldn't be such a stretch. It's not crazy. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. On defense, of course, for the Montreal Canadiens, we've got Mike Matheson and Noah Dobson, Jaden Struble, Lane Hudson, Arbor Xhekaj, and Alexandre Carrier. In goal, right now, somebody's got to pick up their socks because it's either going to be Sam Montembeault or Jakub Dobeš. Marty St. Louis cannot commit. And so what's going to happen in tomorrow night's hockey game? Well, let's take a look at a few things before I get to the keys to victory. And that this next segment is brought to you by cheapesttshirts.ca. Cheapesttshirts.ca has men's, women's, and children's t-shirts, all sizes, hoodies too, with over 1,000 products to choose from. Anything you need for merchandise or the best deals on everyday clothing, cheapesttshirts.ca is your go-to source. Buy today, ship tomorrow, cheapesttshirts.ca. Now, as I was mentioning before, I think the smart play for Marty St. Louis here would be to take advantage of the fact that Joshua Roy, Florian Xhekaj, and Jared Davidson played together in the American Hockey League. So put them together. You never know what kind of chemistry you might be surprised with. Now, granted, Joshua Roy is not a 4th liner by any stretch, but he hasn't really showed that he can play 3rd line minutes either. So I think putting him with guys that he's familiar with might very well spark something in Joshua Roy. Otherwise, he might end up going down and we see somebody like an Owen Beck come back the other way. As far as Joe Veleno is concerned, I think his place, given his last game where he played extremely well, would be replacing Evans and moving up to the 3rd line to play between Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher. But we'll see. What I'm really surprised at, though, is the fact that Juraj Slavkovsky is staying on the 2nd line and Zach Bolduc on the 1st. I would have thought that maybe that experiment was done because it really hasn't brought anything forward. Obviously, you can tell that Nick Suzuki is skating on one leg, and Cole Caulfield has not been as energetic as he normally is. He's been pushed around quite a bit lately. And that comes back to what we talk about as far as, the team being smaller than they should be. There's no pushback. We saw what happened to Evans. Nobody came to bat for him, which I found extremely sad given Jake Evans' body of work and what he means to this hockey team. But bygones are bygones. It's in the past. Now we have to look forward, and we look forward to the Leafs. What are our 5 keys to victory against the Toronto Maple Leafs? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to take advantage of the Leafs' weakened lines. Now, obviously, they're top heavy when you're looking at Järnkrok, Tavares, and Nylander. That could change during the hockey game, but right now, Berube is putting all his eggs in one basket. There's a little bit more depth on the Montreal Canadiens lineup, despite the fact that we're missing key components. So what do I expect? Well, I believe that the top 2 lines on both teams are going to nullify each other. It's going to be a battle of the 3rd and 4th lines tomorrow night. And I think Montreal has a little bit more of a step on Toronto than the Leafs do. Now, granted, as I mentioned, Maccelli can be very dangerous, especially on the power play, so you never know what might come. So take care of your own zone first. The offense will come. But you have to make sure that you exploit all the weaknesses in the Toronto weekend lineup. You need somebody to step up as far as goaltending is concerned. Now, I could have shown you some videos that I pulled from practice today regarding Jakub Dobeš and Sam Montembeault, but I'm saving it for a new series I'm starting that's coming out tomorrow morning called The Art of the Save, where I'm going to be talking to you guys specifically in, I believe it's going to be 4 or 5 different episodes about what goaltending is all about and every single component that goes into it, from the mindset of a goaltender and how you decide to become one, to the technical side of it, moving around, how to learn your footwork, the different ways of angling, stuff like that. A lot of fans have asked for it, so I figured I'd go a little bit more in depth. I always bitch and complain about Eric Raymond, so now I'm going to show you guys what I know about goaltending, and you can see whether or not this jackass is actually doing his job or not. So if we get a good goaltending performance tomorrow, I think the Montreal Canadiens are going to have a much better chance to win. But on the other side of things, if we're facing off against either Joseph Wall or Dennis Hildeby, they've both played well of late. So it's going to be a toss-up. Special teams. The Canadiens have to stay out of the box, keep the Leafs power play off the ice. The Leafs power play, despite the fact that they're missing Matthews and they're missing Nyes, is still lethal. Guys like Tavares, Nylander, Domi, Maccelli, Riley, Ekman-Larsson, they can still put the puck in the net. Still very dangerous. So the less time you spend on the power play, on the penalty kill, the better. And by the same token, draw some damn penalties. The power play needs to get its legs. We know it's suffered over the past 5 games where they haven't been able to do very much, but they need repetition. They need attempts. And so you need to draw some penalties. How do you do that? You move your feet. You force the Toronto Maple Leafs to play on the wrong side of the puck so that they're chasing instead of being in front of you. And when you do that, you tend to draw more penalties, hooks, holds, etc., and you tend to end up on the power play more often than not. It's going to be a very key component, especially given the fact that the Canadiens have had so much trouble, other than last night's game, scoring at 5-on-5. Then you got to control the neutral zone. The Canadiens did an absolutely shitty job of doing that against the Capitals. They got to do a better job of it here. The problem with the Capitals game was that the Canadiens were too focused on offense and not so much on defense. Of course, it starts with your defensemen. Your defensemen have to make sure that when they select a man to cover in their man-on-man defensive scheme, that somebody else covers the others coming in. If not, you got to branch off and figure it out. You can't just stay with one guy at that point. That's the difficult part of playing man-on-man when you're trying to slow other teams down. You have to make sure that you cover areas first and then drop into man-to-man. That's what the Canadiens have not been doing. Instead, in the neutral zone, they've been trying to pick up men, causing confusion because other teams are changing skating lanes and so on, and that forces the Canadiens to make mistakes. When they make mistakes, you end up with goals like that scored by Xhekaj, where he just walks in and nobody covers him, and guys like Noah Dobson are backing off because, hey, he's not my man. But we'll get to that in another show. And then there's the physicality and the structure of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, we know the Canadiens are not an overly physical team, and they're going to get outplayed in that respect by the Leafs. There's no two ways about that. Guys like Domi, Richardson, they play physical. So does Maccelli. All of the bottom 6 does. So the Montreal Canadiens need to bypass that physicality. And how do you do that? You play with speed. You play with structure. You force the Leafs to move their feet. They're not the fleetest of foot. They have a handful of guys that can move, but then after that, they're relatively slow. The Canadiens aren't. Use that speed. Exploit that speed. Make the Leafs move. And when you do that, you get success. The other part of it is you need to be physical on the defenseman. Oliver Ekman-Larsson tends to lose his shit when you get on his back too often. So getting in his head, finishing your checks, forcing him to turn around earlier than he'd like and making him uncomfortable in his own zone is going to be a key. The same goes for Morgan Riley. He doesn't like it either. So your top 2 defensemen in Toronto have tempers. How do you exploit those tempers? You get in on him. Hard on the forecheck. Finish the body checks. Don't just skate away. Play hard. Play physical as much as you can. And make sure you stay within your structure. If you don't stay within your structure, you're not winning. So, structured offense, creating attack triangles in the offensive zone. Structured defense, a good strict man-to-man. Not that I'm a fan of it, but that's the system they play. That's another show that I'm going to do later on, talking about defensive zone play. But one thing at a time. We'll focus on goaltending because right now it's putrid. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to post the Art of the Save episode 1, how to become a goaltender. It's not as easy as most people think. I know. I've been through it. Thanks again to isthecustoms.com and cheapesttshirts.ca for sponsoring the show. Thank you for subscribing and for liking the videos. And we'll see you tomorrow morning with the first episode of The Art of the Show.